The Route 17 diner sat quietly on the edge of Rustwood, Nevada, a roadside haven for truckers and weary travelers. The afternoon sun poured golden light through the large windows, casting long shadows over the black and white checkered floor. Inside, the air carried the comforting scent of sizzling burgers and fresh brewed coffee, a scene of perfect, undisturbed peace. Seated in a corner booth, Mike Tyson savored his meal in silence. A legend in and out of the ring, his presence alone carried the weight of an unspoken challenge. His muscular frame, still as imposing as ever, barely fit within the confines of the booth. He had come here for one thing, a quiet meal and a moment to himself. But trouble was coming. The deep guttural rumble of motorcycle engines shattered the calm, sending an uneasy ripple through the diner. A gang of 6 blood vultures, notorious for their lawlessness, roared into the parking lot, their bikes gleaming under the sun like metal beasts. Outside, they slowed to a halt, their eyes locking onto a single target, Mike Tyson's black SUV. A smirk crept across the face of Jackson Mad Dog Raines, their leader, as he took a long drag from his cigarette. "Looks like we got ourselves a big shot," he muttered, before flicking the cigarette onto the pavement. Then, with a wicked grin, they moved in for the kill. Peace was officially over. Outside Route 17 diner, the blood vultures moved with a swagger born from years of unchecked arrogance. Their leader, Jackson Mad Dog Raines, exhaled a slow stream of smoke, his sharp eyes locked on the gleaming black SUV parked near the entrance. "Hollywood money," he sneered, tossing his cigarette onto the pavement. "Some rich punk thinking he can park wherever he pleases." One of his men, a lanky biker with a scar running down his cheek, let out a low whistle. "Nice ride. Would be a shame if something happened to it." That was all the invitation they needed. With a sickening crunch, a heavy boot slammed into the SUV's door, leaving a deep dent in the metal. Another biker yanked a thick chain from his belt, swinging it in a vicious arc before smashing it against the windshield. The glass spidered but held, a stubborn defiance that only fueled their destructive glee. Laughter echoed through the lot as another thug pulled out a hunting knife, its blade flashing under the Nevada sun. With a swift slash, he sliced into the SUV's tires, the rubber hissing in protest as the air rushed out. Inside the diner, the peaceful hum of conversation screeched to a halt. Betty, a veteran waitress who had seen plenty of trouble in her time, froze mid-pour, the steaming coffee sloshing dangerously close to the rim of a white ceramic mug. Her eyes widened as she caught sight of the gang outside. "Oh my God," she breathed. Then louder to anyone who would listen, "They're trashing someone's car out there. Someone call the cops." At a corner booth, Mike Tyson sat motionless, a forkful of steak frozen halfway to his mouth. For a moment he didn't move, didn't even blink. Then, with slow, deliberate precision, he set down his fork and knife. The booth creaked as he leaned back, exhaling through his nose. He wiped his mouth with his napkin, placed it neatly on the table, and finally spoke. "Whose car?" Betty's throat bobbed. Her hands trembled as she gripped the coffee pot like a shield. "Yours," she whispered. The diner fell deathly silent. The low hum of the jukebox, the quiet clinking of silverware, all of it faded into nothing. Mike Tyson stood up. The air changed. It was subtle, a shift in pressure, an unspoken force that made the space feel smaller, tighter. The chatter of the other customers died as they turned to watch. No one moved. No one breathed. Tyson rolled his shoulders, his sheer presence expanding in the room. As he stepped toward the door, his shadow stretched across the floor, swallowing the light. Outside, Jackson and his crew were still laughing, admiring their handiwork, when the diner door swung open. The laughter died instantly. Tyson stepped forward, his face unreadable, his eyes locked onto the destruction of his SUV. The deep dents, the shattered windshield, the flat tires. His fists, legendary weapons that had dropped some of the toughest men in the world, clenched at his sides. The biker smirked, mistaking his silence for hesitation. Big mistake. Jackson flicked his gaze up and down at Tyson, unimpressed. "Well, well, if it ain't Iron Mike himself," he mocked. "Didn't recognize you without a title belt." His men chuckled. Tyson didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't blink. Then, in a voice low and steady, he gave them one chance. Walk away. Silence. Then, after a long beat, Jackson grinned. Nah. What happens next? Does Jackson realize he just made the worst mistake of his life? Will Tyson teach them a lesson they'll never forget? The desert wind carried an eerie stillness over Route 17 Diner's parking lot. The blood vultures, once so full of swagger, now found themselves standing in the shadow of Mike Tyson. He was still, too still, a force of nature before the storm. Jackson Mad Dog. Rains took a step forward, his lips curling into a cocky grin. Walk away? You got it backward, champ. You're the one who should be walking. His men chuckled, emboldened by his bravado. A biker with a snake tattoo across his neck twirled a steel chain, letting the links jingle menacingly. Another, a hulking brute with fists the size of bricks, cracked his knuckles. Tyson's gaze remained locked on Jackson, his expression unreadable. But beneath that calm exterior, something stirred. A slow, dangerous fire. His voice, low and firm, carried no anger, only fact. Last chance. Jackson snorted. Or what? You gonna punch your way out of this? He spread his arms wide, laughing. Hate to break it to you, legend, but this ain't the ring. Out here, numbers win. The wind howled through the lot. Then, Jackson flicked his cigarette. It landed just inches from Tyson's foot, the ember sparking against the pavement. That was it. Like a bolt of lightning, Tyson moved. Before anyone could react, he closed the distance between them with terrifying speed. His right fist launched forward, a blur of raw power colliding with Jackson's jaw like a freight train. Crack! The sound of bone shattering echoed through the parking lot. Jackson's body lifted off the ground, his limbs flailing before he crashed onto the pavement like a discarded rag doll. Out cold. The laughter? Gone. For the first time, the blood vultures hesitated. They had heard stories about Tyson's fists, but now they had witnessed it. A man with a knife lunged, desperation in his eyes. Bad move. Tyson sidestepped with ease, his body shifting like a ghost in the dark. Before the biker could slash, Tyson snatched his wrist midair, an iron grip locking onto flesh and bone. A heartbeat later, Tyson twisted. The knife clattered to the ground as the biker let out a strangled cry. A devastating left hook followed, connecting with the man's ribs. A sickening crunch. The biker collapsed, gasping, his body curling inward like a broken marionette. The chain-wielding thug swung next. The metal links whistled through the air. Tyson caught them, with one hand. Yanking the chain forward, he pulled the man toward him, delivering a thunderous uppercut to the gut. The biker's feet left the ground before he landed with a dull thud, wheezing for air. The remaining two bikers, they ran. They had seen enough. Tyson exhaled, rolling his shoulders as he turned his gaze downward at Jackson, whose chest barely rose and fell. His face was unrecognizable, swollen and bloody. Tyson crouched, his voice even. Next time, listen. The parking lot was a war zone. Bodies sprawled across the pavement. The last remnants of the blood vulture's pride bleeding into the asphalt. And Mike Tyson? Not a scratch on him. The wailing of sirens grew louder, bouncing off the cracked pavement of Route 17 Diner's parking lot. The blood vultures, once the terror of the open road, were now reduced to groaning heaps of bruised flesh and shattered pride. Mike Tyson stood among them like a monument of power, his broad shoulders rising and falling with slow, measured breaths. His knuckles, though barely scuffed, had done more damage in minutes than any weapon these bikers had ever carried. But it wasn't over yet. Jackson Mad Dog Rains, battered and barely clinging to consciousness, spat blood onto the pavement. His entire body ached, every breath a reminder of the mistake he had made. But the fire in his eyes hadn't gone out. He gritted his teeth, his voice hoarse but laced with venom. This ain't over, he growled, forcing himself to sit up. You got no idea who you just messed with. Tyson exhaled sharply through his nose, calm, controlled, unmoved. I know exactly who I messed with, he said, voice deep, unwavering. A bunch of punks who thought numbers would save them. The words cut deeper than any punch. Jackson's fingers curled into fists against the pavement, his bruised knuckles turning white. He couldn't accept this. Couldn't accept that he had just been dismantled by a single man. Then the flashing of red and blue lights filled the lot. 3 sheriff's cruisers skidded to a stop, their doors flying open. Deputies poured out, hands hovering near their weapons as they took in the wreckage before them. A half-dozen battered bikers, their leader on his knees, and one man standing victorious. Sheriff Hank Billings, a veteran of the Rustwood County Force, stepped forward, adjusting the wide-brimmed hat perched on his graying head. His sharp eyes scanned the mess before landing on Tyson. Well, well, he muttered, voice thick with disbelief. Looks like someone had a bad day. One of the deputies, a younger officer, muttered under his breath, Jesus, did one guy do this? Jackson, still dazed, sneered through swollen lips. He jumped us, he croaked. Came at us out of nowhere. Before he could finish, Tyson let out a low chuckle. Jackson's head snapped toward him, his expression twisting with rage. That how you remember it? Tyson asked, his voice dripping with amusement. I seem to recall 6-on-1, and yet, here we are. Sheriff Billings sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Save it, Raines. Your crew's been tearing up this county for months. Reckon you finally picked the wrong fight. The deputies moved in, pulling bikers off the ground and slapping on cuffs. Some groaned in protest, others were too broken to resist. Jackson, however, wasn't done. As a deputy yanked him to his feet, he lunged, trying to break free. He barely made it a step before Tyson snatched his collar, stopping him cold. With almost no effort, Tyson pulled him close, their faces inches apart. You should have walked away, Tyson rumbled, voice low and final. Jackson struggled, teeth gritted, his breath shallow. But he wasn't stupid enough to swing again. Not now. Billings motioned for the deputy to take him. Get him out of here before he embarrasses himself any more. The moment Jackson was shoved into the back of the squad car, his defiant mask cracked. He turned his head, locking eyes with Tyson through the window. This ain't over, he mouthed. Tyson smirked, shaking his head. Yeah, it is. As the police cars pulled away, Tyson finally turned back toward his ruined SUV. The windshield was shattered, the doors dented, the tires flat. A battlefield souvenir. Behind him, the Route 17 diner had come back to life. Customers peered through the windows, whispering, murmuring, glancing at their phones as they recorded the aftermath. Betty, still holding the coffee pot she had forgotten about, stepped out onto the porch, her expression a mix of awe and exasperation. You gonna want dessert after that, champ? She asked. Tyson chuckled. Depends. Still got that apple pie? Betty smirked. For you? Always. As Tyson stepped back inside the diner, the legend only grew. The neon open sign of Route 17 Diner flickered against the deep Arizona night. Inside, the hum of conversation had slowly returned, but there was a different energy in the air now, a mixture of awe, tension, and the lingering shock of what had just happened. At his booth, Mike Tyson sat with his usual calm, slicing into a warm slice of apple pie as if he hadn't just dismantled an entire biker gang minutes ago. The diner's waitress, Betty, placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of him, shaking her head in disbelief. You got a way of making an afternoon interesting, I'll give you that, she muttered. Tyson smirked, taking a slow sip. Didn't plan on it. But outside, trouble wasn't over yet. Just as the last police cruiser disappeared down the road, the low rumble of approaching engines filled the air again. More motorcycles. Betty's face paled. Oh, hell! The customers froze, eyes darting to the windows as 3 more blood vultures roared into the parking lot. These weren't the beaten-down, humiliated bikers from earlier. These were reinforcements, bigger, meaner, and ready for war. One of them, a burly man with a thick gray beard and a spiked leather vest, killed his engine and stepped off his bike. His cold, calculating stare scanned the diner before landing on the shattered remains of Jackson's crew. His name was Dale Grizzly Corman, Jackson's second-in-command, a man twice as ruthless and with 3 times the hatred. Inside, Betty backed up slowly, whispering, Tell me you're not about to fight round 2? Tyson exhaled, pushing his plate aside. Didn't plan on it. He stood, calm, controlled, unchanged. But outside, Grizzly was already making his move. He walked up to the wreckage of Jackson's bike and kicked it over with a loud clang. Then, without breaking his stride, he turned toward the diner entrance. Tyson was already waiting at the door. For a moment, neither man spoke. Grizzly's lips curled into a smirk. Well, ain't this something? He glanced over his shoulder at the damage left behind. Took out my boys, huh? Tyson didn't answer. Grizzly's eyes darkened. You think that's the end of it? He took a step forward. Jackson's my brother. Blood, don't forget. Tyson's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained even. Then maybe Blood should have picked a better fight. Grizzly's smirk vanished. He charged. The man was fast for his size, lunging forward with the power of a freight train, but Tyson was faster. With the precision of a champion, he pivoted, dodging Grizzly's attack by inches. Then, boom! A right hook landed clean into Grizzly's ribs. The impact sounded like a sledgehammer on steel. Grizzly stumbled, gasping, but didn't fall. He let out a low, growling laugh, rubbing his ribs. That all you got, champ? Tyson's stance never changed, unmoved, unshaken. Grizzly came again. This time he swung a massive punch, wild, reckless, all power. Tyson ducked. And then, with the speed of lightning, he drove an uppercut straight into Grizzly's jaw. Crack. Grizzly's head snapped back, his feet left the ground, and for a brief second he hovered in midair before crashing down hard onto the pavement, out cold. His crew? They backed away. Fast. Tyson exhaled, rolling his shoulders as he stepped back toward the diner. Betty stood at the entrance, arms crossed, shaking her head. So much for a quiet night. Tyson smirked, calm as ever. Didn't plan on it. What happens next? Is this really the end? Or are the blood vultures planning something even bigger? Comment 1 if you think more trouble is coming. Hit like if you think Tyson just proved why he's still the champ. Subscribe now, because this fight, it ain't over yet. The desert wind swept through Route 17 Diner's parking lot, carrying the scent of dust, gasoline, and the faint metallic tang of blood. Mike Tyson stood in the aftermath, his fists lowering as the last of the blood vulture's reinforcements lay motionless at his feet. Grizzly Corman was out cold, his massive body sprawled across the cracked pavement. His men, once full of bravado, were now frozen in place, staring at Tyson like he was a force of nature they'd just angered. The silence was deafening. Tyson exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders. He had felt tougher fights in the ring, but there was something satisfying about taking down men who preyed on the weak. The remaining bikers hesitated, their eyes darting between their fallen leader and Tyson. They wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at them to get the hell out. But they knew that running meant bringing this failure back to Jackson. And that wasn't an option. One of them, a lean, rat-faced man with a patchy beard, swallowed hard and stepped forward, raising both hands. "All right, man," he stammered, his voice lacking the confidence he had earlier. "You made your point. We don't want no more trouble." Tyson's gaze locked onto him, unreadable. He didn't speak. The man nervously glanced at Grizzly's unconscious form, then back at Tyson. "Look, we get it. You're not the guy to mess with, but you gotta know, this ain't over. Jackson ain't gonna let this slide." Tyson let out a slow breath, stepping toward the man. He didn't have to say anything. The biker flinched instinctively, his confidence crumbling under the weight of Tyson's presence. Then, in a low, measured voice, Tyson finally spoke. "Then tell Jackson," he said, his tone carrying the weight of a death sentence. "Next time, he better bring more than 6. The man nodded quickly, backing away. He motioned to the others, and within seconds, they were hauling Grizzly's limp body off the pavement and onto the back of one of their bikes. Engines roared to life, and one by one, the blood vultures peeled out of the lot, leaving behind only skid marks and shattered pride. Tyson watched them go, his expression never changing. Then, he turned back toward the diner. Inside, the patrons who had been glued to the windows now quickly pretended to go back to their meals, though their hushed whispers filled the air. Betty stood at the counter, her hands on her hips. "Well," she said, shaking her head, "guess we can cross Biker War off today's specials." Tyson smirked, stepping back inside and settling into his booth. His coffee had gone cold, his apple pie untouched. Betty poured him a fresh cup. "On the house," she said. Tyson nodded, taking a slow sip. Calm, composed. Outside, the dust was settling. But one thing was clear. This wasn't over yet. The neon glow of Route 17 Diner flickered against the dark Arizona highway. Inside, the clinking of silverware and hushed conversations had returned, but the tension still lingered in the air. Everyone had witnessed it. Mike Tyson had dismantled the blood vultures like they were amateurs. At his booth, Tyson took a slow sip of his fresh coffee, his expression unreadable, calm, controlled, like nothing had happened. But outside in the darkness beyond the parking lot's flickering lights, trouble was already brewing. Just a few miles down the highway, a convoy of motorcycles thundered through the night, their headlights cutting through the desert dust. The bikers rode in tight formation, their leader at the front, Jackson Mad Dog Rains. Bruised, humiliated, and burning with rage, Jackson's fingers clenched around the handlebars, his knuckles white. The pain in his jaw was nothing compared to the fire in his gut. He had underestimated Tyson once. He wouldn't make that mistake again. "How bad was it?" Jackson growled, keeping his eyes locked on the road ahead. Beside him, one of the blood vultures who had escaped the diner earlier cleared his throat. "Bad," he admitted. "Grizzly went down in 2 hits. The others didn't last much longer." Jackson's jaw tightened. Grizzly was a monster, one of the toughest men he had ever known. If Tyson had put him down that fast, Jackson wasn't just dealing with some washed-up fighter. "You sure he's still at the diner?" Jackson asked, voice low. His scout nodded. "Yeah, he went back inside like nothing happened." Jackson smirked, though it hurt his swollen lip. Typical. This time, he wasn't coming in loud. No dramatic entrance, no warnings, just payback. He lifted a hand, signaling his men to slow down. The roar of the engines dimmed as they pulled off onto a dirt road, the diner's glowing sign now a distant dot on the horizon. They would wait. Let Tyson think it was over. And when he least expected it, they'd strike. Back at the diner, Tyson set his empty coffee cup down and glanced toward the window. The desert stretched out before him, quiet and unbroken. But his instincts told him otherwise. Trouble was out there, and it was coming.